Have you always wondered how to create your own sounds with a synthesizer? When you're using your favorite VST or playing around with a preset, does the synthesizer user interface look like a completely foreign spaceship? On this video, I'm going to dive deep into all of the foundational principles and parameters behind synthesis so you can start creating your own sounds and patches in your music productions today. Hey yo, it's Alex from Edit My Music, and with this channel, it's my mission to help musicians produce themselves by developing their mindset, expanding their creativity, and connecting to their inner artist in a deeper way. All right, crash course on synthesis. Synthesis 101. Let's have some fun and dive in. So I've gotten a few comments and some feedback about my audio level, so I'm trying my best to get my routing sorted so that it's a better experience for you. And hey, if you have anything else you would like me to cover on this channel, feel free to drop a comment. I'm super open to suggestions, and I'm happy to create some content that you would like to see. But enough with that. Let's dive into exploring synthesis together. So I'm in Ableton today, and I'm using this synthesizer called Vital. And I talked about this synthesizer in my top 10 plugins of 2021, so check out that video if you haven't. But this synth is actually free, so if you want to follow along with me today or just get your hands on an awesome synth, I'll leave the link below to download it, and it is awesome. Like, this thing kicks major ass, so I definitely suggest you grab it. All right, so let's start off with waveforms and oscillators. All right, so when you're looking at a synthesizer, all of your sound is being generated by what are called oscillators, and they generate sound based upon what waveform you've selected. So right now I have one oscillator turned on, and we have 4 of them on this synthesizer that we can turn on and off. But we're going to focus on one for now. And right now I have this sawtooth waveform loaded up, and I'm going to go to these basic shapes, and we're going to cycle through some of these basic shapes that you'll see to start creating sound. So this waveform is what is called a sine wave. It sounds like this. And typically this is used for bass sounds or some low end sounds. Next we have the triangle wave that looks like this and sounds like this. Has a little bit more harmonic content, a little bit more mids. Next is the saw wave that has much more harmonics. And finally is the square wave, which is kind of similar to a saw wave, but has a different timbre or different texture. Right, so the sine wave, the triangle wave, the square wave, and the sawtooth wave are the basic waveforms that you'll see on most synthesizers, but there are many different types of waveforms that you can actually play with, especially in Vital. So if you click this menu up here, you'll see there's all these different waveforms that you can play with, and they all sound unique, they all sound different, so I encourage you to explore these. All right, but for now, we're going to stick with a basic shape. So I'm going to get out of this menu. All right, and then we're looking at this oscillator. We can actually adjust the level. So we can adjust the volume. We can adjust the pan, right side, left side. We can also adjust the pitch in steps. And we can also play around with what is called the unison. So what unison does is actually creates copies of the waveform you're working with to add multiple voices. So this is a great tool to actually thicken up your sound, because right now we just have one sine wave going on. But if I increase the voices, you'll notice how the sound thickens up. And the other parameter I want to talk about is what is called the detune. And right now it's at 20%. So if I bring this all the way down, all of our voices will be in tune with each other. But as I increase this detune amount, you'll notice that it detunes the extra voices we're adding. And this is great for adding extra width to your sound. All right, the only thing you want to maybe be careful with is getting too much detune percentage with a very low amount of voices, because then they'll sound very dissonant. All right, let's move on to number 2, which is envelopes. All right, so envelopes actually allow you to adjust the attack, decay, sustain, and release of a sound, which will drastically influence its characteristic. And typically, the first envelope that you'll find on a synthesizer is mapped to the amplitude of the sound, so the volume of the sound over time. So if we look at the amplitude envelope of this sound, it has an extremely fast attack. So meaning that the volume jumps to its maximum level instantly, and we have no decay, meaning that there is no drop down in volume, and the sustain is at the same level as our initial attack. And then we have a really fast release. So as soon as I let go of my MIDI controller, the sound stops pretty much instantly. So this is what it looks like. Right? Super fast attack, and as soon as I release, it lets go. But let's say we want to increase the attack time. This means that it'll take longer for the sound to reach its maximum peak volume. Right? It kind of fades in. Next, what we can play with is the sustain. So let's say we wanted the note to sustain at a slightly lower volume than its max peak. So now it's going to slowly ramp up to this max volume, decay, and then sustain at a lower volume. Right? And we can also play with the decay time, which is the time between when it's hitting its max volume and then when it drops down to its sustain volume. So let's increase that. Right? If we lower the sustain, we'll hear that decay a little bit more pronounced. And then finally, we can play with the release, which is what happens as soon as I let go of the note. So now when I let go of a note, it's going to take longer for the sound to fade out. Right? We can even have a super long release so that the note hangs out for quite a bit. All right, so just playing with your oscillator and your waveform and an envelope, you can get a wide variety of crazy sounds. Longer release, fast attack. All right, number 3, we're gonna look at filters. So now we've played around with our waveforms and our envelope, we can now play around with a filter. This is what we got right now. So let's turn on the filter, and in Vital, to turn on a filter, you have 2 of them, and you simply just hit this little circle to turn them on or off. All right, and with our filter turned on, we can now play with what the cutoff frequency is. So right now we have a low pass filter, which will allow the low frequencies to go through. We can also move this for more of a band pass, which is kind of filtering out the highs and the lows. Or we can move it to a high pass filter, which is allowing the high frequencies to come through or filtering out the low frequencies. And we can also play with the mix of the filter. So how much is being filtered out, what oscillator this filter is affecting. Right, we can play with the cutoff frequency, so at what point the filter will cut off frequencies. And we can also play with the resonance, right? So if we play around with the resonance, it'll really start changing the tone of our sound based on the filter and the frequency peak. So if we move this around, you'll see that it actually changes the tone of our sound. Kind of gives it a cool tone. Above and beyond playing around with the actual filter parameters, you can change to all these different types of filters, which will drastically alter your sound. And typically popular or very famous synthesizers, hardware synthesizers that you'll find are known for their filter algorithm, right? Because how you filter a sound will drastically change the characteristic of the sound you're working with. So I highly encourage you to play around with these different filter types to really see what kind of sonic characteristics you can get out of them. And with certain presets, you can play around with the drive of your filter, which will actually add some extra harmonics. All right, number 3 is LFOs, which stands for low frequency oscillator. And this is basically a waveform. So it could be a sine wave, a triangle wave, or some complete unique shape that is used to modulate other parameters. So change other parameters in real time. And the kind of major difference between envelopes and LFOs is that envelopes typically trigger once per note, while LFOs are continuous. All right, so right now we have this LFO shape so let's focus on LFO 1. And if I hold a note, you'll notice that this light is cycling through this shape as I hold a note. So what we can actually do is take this LFO and modulate some parameter relative to the shape of the LFO. So for example, let's find a different shape. staircase down. And let's drag this to the waveform position. All right. Right, so you'll notice that as I'm holding the note, the position of this fader is moving relative to the shape of our LFO. Super powerful. Right, we can also change the frequency. So now it's going faster, or slow it down. Can change the shape. Right, and once you have a parameter mapped to an LFO, you can actually click on this little sphere in Vital, and you can adjust how much the LFO will be affecting that sound. So notice now that the LFO is only going a very small amount up and down the fader, but if I increase this, now it's going farther up and down the fader. And if I max this out, it's going all the way up and down the fader. Right, and this is where the fun part really starts happening with synthesizers, is once you start modulating things with various LFOs and mapping things within each other. So for example, I could take a second LFO, let's change the shape to this shape. I'm going to click and drag this to modulate the filter position. Okay, so as you can see now, this filter is being positioned differently relative to this crazy shape of our LFO. Right, and let's say that was a bit much. Again, I could just click and drag on this and reduce the amount. So that's a little bit more subtle. Right, we could also add another oscillator if we wanted with a different shape. Turn down the volume. Let's find a different shape. Right, let's lower it down. Right, you could do fun things like get a second envelope, increase the attack time, right? And you could map this to, let's say, the level of the second oscillator. So as I hold this, the second oscillator is slowly getting louder in volume and then tapering off. Right, if I solo this, you'll hear it. Right, so sky is really the limit. I'm really just touching the surface with what is possible with this amazing world of synthesis. All right, and number 5, finally, is effects. And this is just like using effects in your DAW, like anything else, but some synthesizers have built-in effects. So if we navigate over to this effects tab, you'll notice that there's all these different effects we could play with, right? So if we want to throw on some chorus, wait, we get some modulation. Let's say we wanted some delay. Ping pong. Maybe you want some distortion. All these wonderful things you can play around with. Phasers. Right? Sky is the limit for what is possible with just very simple controls on a synthesizer. All right, and I just went over the bare bones of what is possible within a synth. And if you don't have a synth already, go ahead and grab Vital for free. It is a fully featured, super awesome free piece of software. So I highly encourage you to grab it. So I really encourage you to start having some fun and playing around and start making your own sounds. Right, and Vital has a bunch of built-in powerful presets with all these crazy sounds. And a great way to learn would be to find a preset you like and then start to analyze how it's constructed. And some of them look pretty complex. It might take you a while. It might be a little bit tedious, but then you'll start to see the inner workings of how to really create these awesome sounds within Vital. And hey, if you're just getting started with music production, having trouble finishing projects, or would just like to get a glimpse inside my personal workflow, I've put together an easy to follow 7-step pro producer roadmap to help you go from your very first ideas all the way to a finished master while injecting it full of awesome recording and mixing tips that I've learned over the years. It's super handy to have around the studio, so if you're interested, you can download that in the link below. And hey, let me know, do you use synthesizers often in your productions? Do you like to get really deep in the nitty-gritty of sound design? If so, what are your favorite sounds? What are your favorite artists? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.